So, like we said before, we're missing a few things here. If you look at the post model itself, you'll notice that when we create a new post and with the user, we have the user email here, but we don't have the username. We also have the email here, and we're expecting the user to have an email property on it. So all of that stuff doesn't exactly work like we want it to. We're also going to need to update the list posts and fetch post by ID methods to include the user's username instead of their email in the query, because we want to keep that as private as possible. So we could start creating a new model and making sure that, or creating a new test and making sure that the results of each query matches what we expect them to. And if we did, it would look something like this. We would touch a models/post.test.js like this, and then we would do the same thing here. We could go in here and we could say we could create like a new post, const new post equals caption, some caption or test, and the image URL is also test, and we would want to also import the post itself, the post model itself, and then we would do all that other stuff like describe user. Like we do with describe user, we're going to describe post. We don't actually need this anymore since that's already being handled. Did we still have that in the user test? Oh yeah, we don't actually need that anymore. We can get rid of that too. Cool. Now here, the thing is, like, instead of describing the user itself, we'll describe the post, and instead of describing user registration, we would do things like describe the create post, describe the list posts, and describe fetch post by ID. And then we would write a few test cases for each of these. But I want to leave this up as to an exercise for the reader, because I think it's a very valuable lesson. At least is like the experience of writing tests and then and changing the code to make them pass. So I would recommend that you pause the video right now, take a few seconds, see if you can write some tests that check to make sure that when we create a post, that post contains, or that post uses the user's ID or the user's username to query them here, and make sure that we return the user's username instead of their email. And the same thing for the fetch post by ID, that we use the username instead of email, and we group by the username, and we use the username instead of email, and we group by the username. And again, the reason why we do this is because we want to make sure that the username is served up to all of the public on our client side instead of the more sensitive email that we're currently using. So take a few seconds, see if you can write these tests. I'm not actually going to give you the answer for them, because I'm just going to show you the solution in the actual post model itself, and then you can see how your tests matched up to what you expected the result to be. So take a few seconds. I'll be here when you get back. Okay, hopefully it took more than a few seconds to make that work, but once that's done and everything seems to be working, let's go into the post.js file and let's make a few changes. Let's replace this user.email with user.username, and we'll just call it username. And then down below, we'll group by that username. Simple enough, right? And then we'll do the exact same thing in the fetch post by ID. We'll say u.username as username, and we'll group by the username. Now, this one's a little bit trickier. It's not too tricky, but we do need to know that the user, when we're using these subqueries here, we want to select the ID from users where the username is equal to the user.username, and then we take that same username that's being passed in and we rename it as username. So that whenever a user creates a new post, all of that information is sent back to the client and updated. Now we could probably do the same thing, by the way, here too, or at least we should, in the patch method. So even though we're not grabbing the user in the actual parameters, it is good to pass back a relatively same signature as we have in our create post method. So by doing that, we should have solved a number of problems in the post model. Now the rating model, again, I would recommend doing the same thing. This time I'm not even going to give you the skeleton for it. I think you should take a look, create your own file, touch a models/rating.test.js, and add a test case for create rating for post and fetch ratings for post by user. Again, both of them we need to update to use the username instead of the email. So take a few seconds, create that file, see if you can write some tests that verify that our code is working as we want it to, and then we'll head back in and write the correct code. And if you want to look at some of the current records in the database, I recommend taking a look at the seed file just to see what is information about the posts, what is information about the ratings, who created the ratings, and for which post, etc., etc. So this is just a good place to see what data you'll be working with when you actually do the testing for the rating. Take a few seconds, come back here when you're ready, and I'll give you the answer. Okay, so hopefully by now you've taken a stab at it, and if you haven't, no worries. I totally understand if you just want to go straight to the answer. I'm not knocking you for it, but it is a good practice. And all we're going to do here is we're going to start by taking this user and changing the email to their username. And we're changing the query from email to username. And we're doing the same thing here. Nothing fancy. And doing the same thing here. Really, we're just replacing all instances of email with username, and nothing scarier than that. And that actually should patch up everything we need for both the post and the rating model. Now to polish this off, all we need to do is update our permissions middleware to use the username as well. Because right now it's using email, and that's not going to fly. And so let's do this one the right way together, so that now that you've had a chance to try it on your own, let's try and do them together and write these tests with me so you get a feel for how to think through this process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to touch middleware permissions.test.js. And then in this, we're going to add some test cases to it. Now again, I'm probably just going to copy. Is that a good one? No, probably not. Let's copy the one from, let's copy some of this. This looks good. And then it has the errors. Cool, has errors. We don't need that. And we actually need the permissions instead of the DB. Cool. Then we run our common before all of that stuff. Yep, we'll need that too. Okay, cool. So now our tests are ready to go. And all we need to do is describe test permissions. So we'll describe them, and we'll describe test auth user owns post. We'll also, actually, you know what? Let's just do only this one for now. We'll leave the other one for later. Test attaches post to res.locals if auth user is post owner. So this this video is getting so long I can't even speak that well, is going to expect a few assertions. Let's say like 4 maybe. We'll say const rec equals params, and we'll say post ID is 1. And then we'll say const res equals let's say locals, and let's take the user and have them have a username that is person. And then we'll say const next equals error, expect error to be falsy. And then we'll await permissions.auth user owns post. We'll pass in the rec, the res, and next. Then we will extract that post from res.locals, and we will expect the post, or post.username to equal person. And we will expect the post.caption to equal my fancy workstation. Now, how do I know it's that? Well, that's what we put in this seed file right here, my fancy workstation. Then I'm going to expect post.userid to equal 1. And that should be a good enough test for now. Let's write one more test in here. And this one, let's leave this here because probably most of it's pretty good. We'll say throws error if auth user doesn't own post. And we'll put 2 assertions in here, and we'll give the username of wrong owner or something like that. And then we will expect this error instance of forbidden error. Did we import that? I think I might have just imported it for us. Cool. To be truthy. And then we'll actually call this, and we will expect that post to be falsy. Cool. So this is simply testing the auth user owns post method in the permissions module. I recommend you take a second, now that you've had a chance to do a few of them on your own, you've watched me do one with you, I want you to write the tests for the auth user is not post owner method the same way we did right here. It's kind of the inverse, so doing that shouldn't be too bad. But I highly encourage you to try and write those tests yourself. It's good practice, and again, shouldn't be too difficult given we've already created the reverse case here. So go ahead and pause this video, give it a shot, take a few seconds, and done. Great. Now let's patch up those permissions middlewares. Well, first, actually, let's run those tests to make sure they're failing. npm test permissions.test.js. Cool, it's failing. Looks to be good. Did I mess it up? Nope, seems to be okay. Attaches ifs, okay. Seems alright. Looks like I didn't make any errors here. Now let's patch up those permissionless middlewares to make sure they work the way we want them to. Which means that instead of saying post.userEmail, we'll say post.username does not equal user.username. And then down here we'll do the same thing. We'll say post.username equal to user.username. And that should actually, hopefully, fix everything so that it's working like we want it to. So let's run that again. Make sure it's passing. And they are. Let's run the whole test suite. Make sure they're all passing. Ah, we got some failing ones. Cool. Okay, lots of good stuff to look at here. Let's see. Looks like we forgot to await something. Makes a lot of sense. Your test suite must contain at least one test. Is there one that I didn't put in here? Ah, yes, this post.test. Okay, cool. Well, let's just delete that for a second. Or actually, super simple. Let's say test. Less simple. Test. Dummy test. Expect 1 to be truthy. Okay, let's run that again. Stop this, run it. Still have some errors, but it looks like only one test is failing. That's good news. Let's see what it is. Whole test suite. A user already exists. Ah, okay, cool. So that user is still in there. Let's see if we can fake user 3. Because I don't think we ever reset that whole database. Fake 3. And let's try it one more time. Hopefully we're passing now. Ta-da! And our whole test suite is passing. Now this took a while. And in fact, good testing takes a while. But it is well worth it in the long run. Getting familiar with it is key to making sure that you write software that does what you want it to do. Now in this case, I'd probably still want to test all of these post routes. I'd want to test the rest of my auth routes, and I'd want to test my post and ratings model pretty thoroughly. But for the time being, I feel pretty good about this. Let's commit things. Git status, git add, git commit, tested, middleware, and fixed app to use username in decoded token. Good. Looking pretty good. Now let's make sure that things are synced up with the front end.